Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to tonight's Development and Management Committee meeting. We'll begin by introducing all members. My name is Councillor Mohammed Adnan. Start on the right.
Hi, good evening. Neil Watson. I'm Pendle's Planning Officer for the evening. Excuse me.
Ashton Quinn, Councillor for Horsfield and Waterside.
Sarah Coburn-Price, Councillor for Bullsworth and Fulridge.
Martin Stone, Councillor for Barrowford and Pendleside.
Muhammad Aslam, Bradley Ward Councillor.
David Gallier, Barrowford and Pendleside. David Whip, I'm Councillor for Aby and Coates Ward.
Yvonne Tennant, I'm Councillor for Marsden and Southfield Ward.
Sajjad Ahmed, Councillor for Blythe, Field East and Clovelly.
Joanne Eccles, Committee Administrator at Pendle Council.
Does any member have any interest he or she wishes to declare? Thank you. Item 2, could we please approve the minutes from the last meeting?
Can I move them?
Moved by Councillor Whip, second by Councillor Aslam. Let's move on to the planning application. Planning application number 23/0516, erection of one dwelling at 147 Wheatley Lane Road, Barrowford. We do have 4 speakers down. Could we please start with Paul Hurley, please?
Hello, my name's Paul Hurley. Chairman, councillors, ladies and gentlemen. Our bungalow and the back garden sits directly behind the rear of 147, along the southern length of the proposed plot and only 5 metres from the boundary, and due to the gradient of the land substantially lower. This application relies on the Growth Lancashire report to support the argument that it is not detrimental to the conservation area. And the Growth Lancashire report says they are influenced by the Inspectorate's PIC recommendation. The Inspectorate has to put a lower and upper limit on the number of dwellings so it doesn't impact on the conservation area, as per the .gov website. He states a minimum of 1 and a maximum of 2 dwellings at the rear of both 145 and 147. With the addition of the coach house and 145's application, there will be 3 additional dwellings instead of 2. So as this is outside his limits, this does detract from the conservation area. So the Growth Lancashire report can't be relied upon, cannot rely on the PIP, and therefore the application can't rely on the Growth Lancashire report to say there is no impact on the conservation area. Also, the Growth Lancashire report omits the impact on the conservation area from the southern view. The building is offset along the boundary from our bungalow and so is not hidden, and due to the gradient of the land, the house will be sitting up. The plan shows a gap in the trees to the south. The current trees will therefore be cut down to provide these lovely views across the vale, together with the views of us enjoying our back garden and house. Therefore, this big 260 square metre LA style mansion will be in full view of the path in the field below. This path is mentioned in the conservation area appraisal. This will detract from the conservation area. Both ours and 147's properties are on a hillside which slopes considerably. This gradient and its significant implications has not been considered and cannot be appreciated from the plan or from anywhere else but below the site. The application's southeast elevation is almost entirely covered in glass and has 2 first-storey balconies from which you can look towards the back of our house and back garden with a grandstand view from its raised position. It was stated at the last meeting that the separation between the application and our property has been increased and the gradient of the land has been taken into account. I have not been able to find any evidence of documents to support this, and if this is the case, it does not comply with Pendle's SPD. The latest amended plan shows a separation of 21.1 metres with no increase, and no topology report to show the change in level between the proposed building and our plot, which would justify leaving it at this minimum distance. The site does not seem to have been properly and professionally surveyed or assessed from our land, which is the way to determine the difference in levels. The SPD says the minimum distance of 21 metres between habitable rooms should increase to take into account any significant change in levels, as this results in the buildings appearing larger than they are. It states that this distance should be increased by 3 metres, therefore this distance should be 24 metres minimum. Also, planning did not provide an explanation for allowing 2 balconies.
Sorry.
Sorry, good to continue.
Okay. Also, planning did not provide an explanation for allowing 2 balconies and the overshadowing building that will affect our privacy and enjoyment, which is contrary to the SPD. There are 4 statements in the SPD, all of which address these points and exacerbate and is exacerbated by the gradient. The first one, the installation of balconies at first floor level can result in a significant loss of privacy for neighbours. In many cases, they will not be acceptable. This application has 2 balconies. A 1.8 metre fence as suggested will not shield privacy from a first floor window. These balconies are close to the boundary and will have a royal box view of us enjoying the garden. Applications must adequately, this is number 2, applications must adequately protect neighbours enjoying their own home and must not overshadow to an unacceptable degree or have any overbearing effects on neighbours' properties. This actually appears in bold in the SPD. Third one, where siting, scale and massing would appear unduly obtrusive from a neighbouring property or adversely affect the use of and enjoyment of this garden area, this will not be acceptable. Fourth one, windows should not directly and inappropriately overlook neighbouring gardens and dwellings. This application is harmful to the conservation area and in breach of the SPD. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Second speaker, Susan Webb.
I'm reading this on behalf of Dr. Salmon and Mrs. Salmon. We are the occupants of House 149. Our house shares a long border with House 147 extending from Wheatley Lane Road northbound to our back garden southbound. These are the points of our reservations and concerns. Planning. 2 years ago, a joint application for houses 147 and 145 plan was submitted to the council to erect 2 houses in their back gardens. The council rejected this plan on the grounds that it would harm the conservation area. The current plan is a separate individual one for a house 147, which does not resemble the PIC plan and is more complex. It entails the erection of a 7.6 metre high 2-storey house, which would be overbearing and imposing on our garden, infringing on our privacy and blocking the sunlight from the southeast. Although this proposed development is set back in the garden and said only to be partially visible from the roadside on approach in either direction, however, it will be quite visible from the forest lane and the track running through the field just below, harming the character of the conservation area. This plan envisaged creating a parking space for 8 cars and a shared drive for 3 properties, which would run parallel to our long border with House 147, imposing on our privacy, creating unnecessary traffic with a consequence of air and noise pollution. The exit and entrance to this driveway is quite narrow and it is tightly sandwiched between the coach house and House 147. This problem was raised in Lancashire County Council's highway report. This narrow exit and entrance can cause obstruction to the pedestrian highway. This will create problems for emergency vehicles, e.g. fire and ambulance, accessing the rear property. This does not seem to have been considered. Any visitors to these 3 properties will end up parking on Wheatley Lane Road on the pavement outside the coach house front. The report submitted to the Development Management meeting under residential amenity compares the 7.6 metre high brick wall of the proposed development, the tree belt present at the boundary in blocking the sunlight. However, this tree belt is weak with little coverage, allowing a significant amount of daylight daily. that a 7.6 metre high brick wall will completely block out the sun and it will be overbearing. 2. The plan for the coach house. The plan to convert the coach house into a residential house was submitted almost 3 months after the inspectorate granted PIP. We trust that the inspectorate was not aware of this grander plan of having 5 houses instead of the existing 2 houses. The windows of the coach house are at 0 distance from our property because the coach house makes part of the border between our property and house 147. These windows overlook the entrance, the driveway and the garage of our house. They also have full sight of the windows of our study room and bathroom, denying us any privacy. This is not in compliance with the supplementary planning document SPD guidelines. The negative impact on the conservation area and the local environment. This plan is not environmental friendly because it implies replacing a garden with a house, shared drive and parking lots. The garden will be subdivided and it will be greatly reduced. The existing generous garden complements the beauty of the semi-detached 147 Victorian house. It is also reflective of the history of the conservation area and reinforces its special character. It would sacrifice protected trees, make irreversible damage to wildlife such as bats and birds, which are protected species under the Wildlife and Countryside Act of 1981, and generate more traffic with consequence of air and noise pollution. Conclusion. We believe that this application should not be considered in isolation but in conjunction with other plans, including that for House 145 and that for the coach house. We do not accept the suggestion that the plan for the coach should be determined on its own merit, since this implies piecemeal erosion and destruction of the conservation area. These plans would make the plot overcrowded, increasing house density, contrary to the spirit of the conservation area, as envisaged by the Carhall estate of having high status houses in generous gardening. The suggestion that it does not matter what damage you do to the conservation area as long as it looks okay from the outside is hypocritical, because conservation areas are what they are made of. The suggestion that the council should approve the planning application regardless of how destructive it is to the conservation area, simply because it may incur a cost to the council in case of its refusal, is disturbing. We believe the council can put a strong case for appeal, explaining why this plan was rejected repeatedly, and this is because the plan is detrimental to the conservation area. We understand that the council has the statutory duty to preserve, protect and enhance the conservation areas, and hence we strongly urge the council to reject these plans, as it did when first stated that it would harm the conservation area.
Thank you. Ashley Rostron.
Good evening. I'm very impressed with all the work that the councillors have done. And Neil, I read your report. Did you write? You've written this?
No.
No. So as I look through it, it seems to have like a hand up for help to refuse this application. So I am impressed with it. Rightly, many are concerned by this application and what will become of a conservation area. And this is expressed in all the documents and evidence from all parties, including council's own objections. See page 9, I've numbered it as page 9, there's 5 lengthy paragraphs objecting to it. Indeed, the commission was refused prior to the permission in principle. And the pit differs considerably from what we're looking at today. The pit does state a maximum of 2 dwellings. Now we're discussing a 3rd dwelling in the garden, as the garage at 147 has already been granted permission as a detached dwelling and could easily be sold off separately from the original home. There is never any mention of the pit for 3 dwellings within the domestic heritage, the garden of this application. More importantly, the PIP states access to the proposed building plots is from the rear of 145 and 147 down an unadopted lane. Neil Watson, Director of Planning Estates, sorry if you haven't listened. On the middle of page 10, the council feels the only viable option is to use the access to both sides from the existing unadopted lane and not the existing individual residential drive. That is on page 10.
Is that the parish council?
The parish council.
The parish council.
Is that the parish council?
Yeah.
Well, that's a problem for the applicants. My late father bought the field below, and my mother now owns the majority share of the rights of access down the unadopted lane. (145) and 147, and the two building plots on the lane have no right of access down the unadopted lane. This is confirmed by the land registry and my solicitor. I explained this error to the applicant. I also asked if I could buy the potential building plots. The reply was swift and very responsive. Indeed, the planning application has been substantially altered to fit what can return the most financial gain. The planning inspectorate would agree this is a significant change to the planning in principle. 3 dwellings is not 2. It's confused, shared, cramped access situation. There is also mention in the report, page 9, that the recommendation is to approve. This is only based on the fear of the pit, and more so, I believe, the cost of defending. What are the costs? How are they calculated? It's a conservation area. The area and the properties are outstanding and have remained almost unchanged for over 100 years. So designated as a conservation area, hence the spacious layout. The owners of these aspirational homes have paid many taxes to be able to live there and have businesses employing many people in the area. Surely any costs incurred can be justified to fight an appeal process. There has not been anything like this allowed previously. 145 were refused a similar application to build in the garden some 30 years ago. I was quite astonished Pendle Council no longer have a conservation officer. The decision is now to outsource this service. Growth Lancashire have done the work, possibly for cost saving or ease. This itself seems a contradiction. Conservation and Growth Lancashire. As a member of the public, it seems quite an odd choice. Though the report does state the development will damage the conservation area. All the homes have, until this application, large spacious plots, their own private driveways and garages, and their dwellings are grand in scale and proportion, which in turn suit the size of the gardens and distances between the homes, which is in keeping of the area. Now we are discussing an application to squeeze in a very large third extra house into an existing garden. For the area, this is not one of the homes with the largest garden. It's quite a small, compact garden compared to many others. And now it's only allowing the minimum distances between the homes, condensing a lot compared to all the other homes. The minimum distances are these what are required by planning, and these differ greatly from with shared and then this with the shared access differing greatly from the planning principle. If it is approved, the surface water drains of 141 lead directly through the building plots, and if we're going down this route, I'll be quite serious about putting 2 more in my mum's back garden. And there's quite a few properties with 3 and 4 acre gardens. Could be opening the can of worms. Thank you.
Richard Maudsley.
Good evening. I'm Richard Malty, Architect Director at Sunderland Peacock and the agent. As you're aware, this application is referred to this committee as the Barrowford and Western Parish Committee sought to refuse the proposal on heritage grounds, contrary to the officer's recommendation and against the advice of the Council's Heritage Consultees for Lancashire. As the agenda for this evening's meeting states, such a decision would leave the Council at risk of costs being awarded in the event of an appeal. Paragraph 11 of the NPPF states that any proposals which meet the requirements of the development plan should be approved without delay. The principle of the development, subdivision of the plot and the overall impact on the character of the conservation area has previously been established by way of an appeal. The report before you tonight and the professional advice of your officers confirms that the detailed application now submitted at 147 is squarely in accordance with the relevant provisions of the Pendle Core strategy and framework. It should therefore be approved in accordance with paragraph 11. Officers advised members at the two previous meetings that there were no clear or defensible grounds on which to refuse the application. There has been no material change in circumstances since the Growth Lancashire comments were issued, and the response from the Council's Heritage Consultees is unambiguous. They confirm that no harm to the heritage asset will rise as a result of the proposals, and your officers rightly note that as a result, the balancing exercise set out in paragraph 202 of the framework is not engaged in this instance. As such, heritage impact is not a reason to resist the application. The proposals represent a robust and comprehensive design process, having considered all the constraints and opportunities, as well as those with relevant professionals such as arboriculturists, ecologists, LCC highways and planning consultants to produce a scheme which is high quality in design and meets all technical standards. The result of this is that there are no objections for any consultees, relevant statutory consultees. The scheme, as a matter of course, will integrate renewable credentials and systems, including sustainable drainage, and as per the illustrated heat pump and solar panels as part of the scheme. In conclusion, Growth Lancashire, along with the Council's officers, have endorsed the approach to design, scale, layout and massing in this setting, confirming that the character and significance of the heritage asset is preserved as a result. In the absence of any other technical constraints or material considerations, we ask that you concur with the recommendation of your officers and approve this compliant application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any councillors wish to speak? Councillor Whip.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I ask Mr Watson some questions? And arising from the speakers, really. First of all, in respect of what Mr Hurley said, and in terms of the slope and the proximity of the property to the existing house, and the presence of the first floor balconies, does that not in itself constitute a breach of the, if I said design codes that we have?
Through you, Chairman, just looking at the site, existing house here, you've got a slope down there, because we were on precarious ground on the flags today. Then we walked across there. The site itself will be slightly cut in here, and then it will be level going to the boundary of the site. I went to the neighbour's property. There is a slope, but the house is actually maintained at a higher level, and then you walk down the garden, so the house, the bungalow, stays at a level, and then the garden slopes down. There is a drop, but the drop is the more significant drop, so down from the house and then beyond the bungalow and round it, because you've got steps going down to much lower levels. So in terms of the land differentials between the two sites and between the two properties, it's not significant. It is lower, but significant, I would have said, 2, 3, 4, 5 metres it's certainly not at that level. It's relatively, it does drop down, but it isn't a significant drop. You will always get houses looking over gardens, etc. You will get that because that's the nature of where we are. Every development has that. That's why we have the SPD to look at what distances, etc., will be appropriate or not. Okay. We've tested that in many appeals. We've had ombudsman cases around that, and our SPD says 21 metres between windows, unless there are significant level differences. You've been to site. My view is there are level differences, but they're certainly not significant in this situation. So you've also got the issue to consider. They're offset, they're not squarely facing each other. So the views across there will be ground floor to ground floor. You won't see there because the proposal is for fence, so there'll be no ground to ground overlooking. It's first floor to first floor. You have to consider that it's at an offset angle as well. That wouldn't suggest you must go further away. That would suggest that the impact is going to be less because of that angle. So we're in a precedent planning system. We have guides that we have. If you're going to depart from that, you have to have a justification to do that. I can't see significant level changes. I know the neighbour disagrees, but a sloping site of that nature there is not a significant level change. There is a level change, but it's not major. You've got slightly offsetting in there, so it wouldn't suggest that you increase that level to certainly not to 24 metres. Where the balconies are, here, there is a large window at first floor for a bedroom, which is the closest. The balconies from there to the house is 25 metres. So the balconies will be in excess, even if were you to apply the 3 additional metres, would be further away than that. So in all, what I'm getting to, I don't believe there is a sustainable argument to say that privacy will be affected to a point where you could justify refusal.
Okay. Well, you've answered my follow-up question really, which was about the impact on residential amenity, and you've said that wouldn't be a factor. Mr. Ostrong and others mentioned the planning in principle and the fact that in practice there are 3 additional dwellings and not 2 additional dwellings. So is that not a ground that we could sustain if we turned this down and went to appeal?
Again, through you, Chairman, it's factually incorrect. There's the coach house, the outhouse, is being converted to another unit, but that was never part of the PIP. The PIP related to this site and the one next door. So where the PIP was approved, allowed an appeal, there's no extra houses. And it's a conversation we have a lot. You can refuse, but what is the harm? You have to have planning harm. Okay, there are 3. Say we accept there are 3. Where does that take you into? What is the harm that causes? If you can't show planning harm, then it's irrelevant whether they're 2, 3, 6, 10 or 20. It's got to have an impact of some kind. So what is that impact? It doesn't lead to any changes in privacy because the other building's static. So there's no additional pressure on the conservation area. So that's an issue that you won't be able we wouldn't be able to substantiate. So you get round to other impacts. Would it be car parking? So is there enough car parking to serve the developments? That certainly is something that you would look at because this is a different access arrangement than was envisaged. If you get away from the car parking, what other planning harm is there? It's got to be an actual tangible that we can go into an inquiry in front of an inspector to say this is the harm this is causing. I'm really struggling. Okay, there's 3 houses, not 2. I don't agree with the maths because there's always 2 on these bottom plots, which is what it was always going to be. But what is the harm unless we can demonstrate that? You know, without being flippant, and I'm not being flippant here. So what if there's 3?
Okay, can I...
Excuse me, if I had a chance to speak, sorry. Councillor.
Can I ask the question about, well, 2 things, again relating to the planning in principle. Mr Watson's just mentioned that the access is different, so does that invalidate the planning in principle that was approved on appeal? And then secondly, the indicative plans for the planning in principle are quite a bit different to the plan that's been submitted, and is that a justifiable reason to say this is, you know, it's sufficiently different that the PIP does not apply?
Chairman, we are in a precedent system, so the planning system in the UK is precedent driven. So if something's happened, there is a precedent. You've got to take that on board, and you've got to take, you don't have to agree with them, and you can make different decisions, but you have to take those on board. So that was the indicative plan that the inspector looked at. And I'll just read you paragraph 11 of his or her report. And it says, however, this plan does demonstrate that the resultant 4 plots, and by 4 is including the existing houses, are capable of remaining generous. So even though he shouldn't give weight to that, he has said, actually, I think these are still generous plots within that. So PIP does not look at access arrangements. It specifically is required not to do that. It doesn't look at drainage, doesn't look at design. It simply says whether in principle you can develop on that site. The rest of it is for you to decide on now. So you can take it that an inspector said there's nothing inherently wrong with developing that site. You're looking at the nitty-gritty of that, the design, the layout, the impacts, etc. But what you can't get away from, and I think there's still an argument that's being put forward, is just the principle of developing here is unacceptable. It isn't. You've had that from a planning inspector. It's the actual individual characteristics of this that you're looking at now. So the fact that it has a different access, again, if the access now proposed is safe, can accommodate the vehicles, has got visibility displays, etc., so it's a safe access, then why would you refuse it? Just because it differs from this is not a reason to refuse. It's got to be a tangible planning issue that it's dangerous or whatever it may be. The fact that it's different is irrelevant.
Thank you, Chairman. I haven't got any further questions. I've got a comment. I wasn't able to visit this afternoon with the official site visit, but I did have a look last Friday, I think it was, and I do agree with the recommendation in the report that we can't substantiate this on grounds of impact on the conservation area. However, I think that the impact on residential amenity might well be something that is a factor, although Mr Watson's just naysayed that one. So, yeah, I'm not sure that we've got much of a leg to stand on if this goes to appeal.
Thank you. Councillor Suckley.
Thank you, Chairman. When I looked at this application and I saw the PIP, I thought, right, that decision's been made. So I know we've explored that further because there's been some questions about it. I thought that decision's been made. So we need to look at more of the detail of the application and see what's going on, what is the intention here to build what, and how does it respond to the other properties, how does it respond to the conservation area, how does it respond to the community in that place as well. I know the area, I walk through this area quite often, so I knew the road, and I was trying to think about the style of the area, and that's a really difficult thing to do because it doesn't really have a style as such. There is lots of different elements and lots of different house types, predominantly semis as you approach that from the Barrowford end, and then it kind of changes. And there are so many different styles. I was thinking, there's terracotta roofs, there's slate roofs, there's modern style, there's render, there's pebble dash, there's lots of different things. So when I looked at the elevations for the property and the design of the property in itself, I was sort of torn because I'll be honest, I don't love the property. It doesn't set me on fire. I think it could be improved. That's my personal opinion. And if I was going to build something there, I think that actually, rather than trying to get something that was a pastiche of trying to mock what was already there, I'd have gone modern. I'd have just done something that was completely contemporary, because it doesn't, there's no overriding style in that area. You could have pretty much done what you wanted. I feel that the design is possibly a bit confused because it's trying to mimic lots of different elements in there, so it probably wants to be simplified. But because we're not, I think that's a decision for the developer to think about what they intend to build rather than for us to decide, because I don't think we're trying to decide on a design code issue, as Councillor Whip was talking about earlier, because I think that there's very little to go on in terms of a particular style in this area. So the decision about whether to build on it, I think we've already sort of established that something can be built here. Whether it's the right thing or not, I'm yet to be convinced by the design, but that's a challenge for a good qualified architect, I think, more than me.
Thank you. Councillor Martins.
Thank you, Chair. I want to thank all the speakers and for the very well-made points that you've all made. And this is, without doubt, a difficult judgment to come to. I did want to pick up on a couple of points in particular. Firstly, the Growth Lancashire assessment as to whether or not the proposed development preserves or enhances the character or appearance of the conservation area. I think it's a well-made point. Why are Growth Lancashire making a judgment about a heritage site? It seems a little bit odd. However, that aside, I don't find, in reading this Growth Lancashire report, that it is particularly clear. It's in fact somewhat ambiguous at several points. It notes, for example, that the generous garden plots are reflective of the history of the CA and reinforce its special character, then conveniently seems to forget about the impact on the garden plots of the proposed development. It notes that, I quote, whilst the proposed property would be a considerable new built addition to the conservation area, it again never really develops that point or comes back to it. It seems to forget about it. The impact on views. It talks about the impact on views from the roadside, whilst ignoring the impact on views from Forest Lane and the track. So others may find this the conclusion of the Growth Lancashire report. Whilst that is a little bit, it's fairly unambiguous, and it talks about, I feel the proposal will cause no discernible harm. I don't find the report to be internally consistent with itself, in that it makes points and then drops them without ever subsequently refuting them or considering them. So I find that report to be a lot more ambiguous than perhaps it might be interpreted as just by reading the conclusion. I also wanted to talk about the design, because the design is, it seems to me, very relevant to this application and to the conservation area. And I note, I'm going now to the officer report on page 10. The report acknowledges that the southeast elevation does have a large amount of glazing, then sort of dismisses it as a, well, it's not that visible from public vantage points, but it does nevertheless have a large amount of glazing, which seems somewhat incongruous. It goes on to say, well, it's modern in design, it's trying to, but it uses the same colours as the other buildings, so it's not out of keeping with the conservation area. But again, I challenge the large amount of glazing. The two balconies surely are out of character, not in keeping with the conservation area. So I have problems with the internal consistency of the officer report, again, because it almost dismisses, it mentions things that like glazing in the balconies, but then never seems to really consider the implications, almost dismisses them. Again, I have trouble with that. I don't agree with that. I think this is a poor design for the conservation area, in my view, and I think there is damage to the conservation area as well. So, from my perspective, Mr. Chair, I would move to refuse this application.
Could we have the grounds for refusal, please?
Yeah, the grounds are inappropriate design for the conservation area.
Councillor Ahmed, and then I'll
maybe someone wants
No,
to second it.
no, you're the ward councillor.
We've discussed this in great detail at the Barrowford and Western Parishes Committee, and some of the points which have been made this evening were discussed at the area committee. I just want to go back, Neil, if it's okay with you, just a couple of questions in terms of the levels which we were talking about earlier on. In terms of the drop, have any measurements been taken place, or is it just a case of making that judgment purely by a visible inspection?
So we asked late in the day, I've got to say, but we asked for a cross section, and obviously they didn't have levels on the neighbouring property, so it is from officer observations, but members have been on there today, they will have seen it. It isn't a big drop, it is modest.
I've like others, I've been on site, and I came to a different conclusion. I felt the drop was more significant. That's what's being reported. But maybe that's just the way I looked at it. I don't know.
But Joe, actually, when you're on the plot itself, and I walked it, got very wet today, but when you walk that, there's very little slope down from there, and the house is going to be built at grade. So when you get to the back of the neighbouring property, you have two sets of levels. You have one where the bungalow is. That is maintained at a higher level, and then it drops down, so you've got a pathway around, and then you have steps going down. It is a lot steeper at the front. I don't disagree with that. In terms of the house, which is the main impact that we're looking at, the house is maintained at a higher level. You've got some seating, then it drops away down to where you can walk around the front of the house. But the house is maintained at, I don't know, 1.5 metres, 2 metres higher than when you walk around the front. So we can agree to disagree on that, but taking the house level, I'm very confident that it's at a reasonable level.
I think it's a subjective assessment, I would say. I think, like you said, I think we'll have to agree to disagree. The second point, in terms of the residential amenity aspect of it and the balconies, I know what you said in terms of the refencing between the properties. If you've got the balcony, which is going to be obviously a lot higher, whether there's a fence or not, the visual impact on the neighbours is going to be significant.
Could we see that facade?
I don't think I've got it here, I'm afraid. I didn't put the... But yeah, you have two balconies, but it's in layout. The balconies are at this side there. So there's 21 metres there, 21.1, and then measure from there, it increases to 25 metres.
How close is it from the boundary itself?
It's
7.1.
7.1
Yeah.
and 8.9. 7.1, 8.9. So
Quite close to the boundary.
well, it depends what you would define as close, but if you look at the numerous decisions we will have on new housing layouts, you would see that relationship often.
Neil, sorry, just a further question in terms of, you spoke earlier, you mentioned something which I didn't quite catch, that the house is to a slight angle.
Yep.
Is that, and if you're looking straight, but if you're on a balcony or if you're from the neighbours, you wouldn't necessarily just look straight ahead, you'd be looking left, right. The visibility aspect of it would be wider than just looking straight ahead.
But if you, through your chairman, if you have windows directly ahead, you see the whole room. If you had a window over there at an angle on that wall, you would see part of it, so it reduces that visibility of how much you can see into the room. So the more acute the angle goes, the less of a privacy impact. I'm not saying it's you can't see there, I'm just saying it lessens the impact.
Again, that's a subjective test then.
Well, you say subjective. Inspectors do look at that, they do assess it, and they do make judgments about that, which is what the committee's here to do. But if the wider the angle goes, or more acute, whichever way around it is, then that is assessed. So you have to take that into consideration.
Because the reason I say subjective test is because if the point was made at the area committee, if someone's on the main road walking past, the impact that they would perceive there on the conservation area would be minimal. Whereas if you're looking at that from the neighbour's perspective, one could argue the impact on the neighbour is far more significant.
So you've got to be careful of that, and you don't stray into wrong territory. The impact on the conservation area wider is a public interest issue. The impact in terms of views, that is not loss of privacy, but in terms of if you have a view across a piece of land and someone wants to build there, you have no rights to those views as individuals. And so one's a public issue, which is the impact on the conservation area, the other's a private one. Loss of privacy isn't though, but you go back to subjectivity. That's why we have an SPD to stop that subjectivity. So you've got a yardstick by where you would measure that, and that we've used countless appeals, countless decisions, ombudsman decisions. They all look at the SPD and what that says.
Yep.
So you can't dismiss that lightly.
So in terms of the impact on the residents, do you think that's one of the reasons, or could be a reason, potential reason, that could be argued? If you went to appeal?
No. I think it will be difficult. I'm not saying, it always surprises me what the planning system will come up with. But if I was looking at it from an appellant's point of view, you go, well, your SPD says 21 metres. I'm further than that, and it's at a slightly acute angle. It isn't significantly different. I'll prove that an inspector can go and see that. You can see it when you walk around the house. It's not significantly different. So what would you argue? What would your argument be from an inspector?
My final comment, I'll finish then, is we discussed this at the area committee, and it was a unanimous decision. The parish councillors who were present also agreed with the borough councillors in terms of the reasons, or the conclusion we came to that we should refuse this application. So my request and plea to this committee is please refuse the application based on what's been moved by Councillor Martin Stone.
Thank you. Councillor Coburn-Rice.
So, probably a little bit unusual, we came early, so had a little chat with Mr Watson and got his expert opinion. When I first read the papers, I felt, right, okay, I know what's happening here. The principle of development is established by the PIP, and now we need to look at the design and its effects on the conservation area to a lesser extent, taking into account what the Growth Lancashire consultant said. What we've got essentially with the PIP is so confusing because we've got a different access from the PIP, we've got a different plot from the PIP, and I now take, having spoken to Mr Watson before the meeting, we don't have a different number of houses because the plot then was right across the back, albeit that the inspector didn't know that the coach house would be a house. My sort of observation, my sort of common sense observation is we have two houses and potentially we're going to have 5 houses, and the one building on the site that could have taken cars is now going to generate cars. So we're moving from building that's built to, well, it was built for horses, but then after that cars, now will be even more cars. So it's going to be very littered with vehicles, this plot, and I accept that, thanks to tree cover, not so visible either from the lane or Wheatley Hall Road. I would say the thing that I always say at this point is if your biggest boast about a building is that it can't really be seen, then it's not a great building. You should be able to have something more positive than that. But I went down the track and looked up at the houses, and of course that's still the conservation area. I feel that it is really obvious that the only visualisation that we've got is really the effect on Dr. Salmon. And if we could go back to that one visualisation that we've got, we could just see that it's basically an enormous 7.6 metre brick wall. Essentially, that's all that he's got. And the officer's report says, oh, it's a bit the same as trees, trees are taller than the house. But it's not the same as trees, because trees lose their leaves, trees filter light, trees move. The 7.6 metre solid, no windows brick shape that will loom over one of the neighbours won't change ever. It sits there as a permanent thing. And then if we look at the fact that the PIP shows the building much more straight on compared with the actual plan that we're looking now, which has it at an angle, we have to ask, why is it at an angle? Is it at an angle to facilitate great parking or great layout? No, it isn't, because I've stood in 143, and the reason it's at an angle is to facilitate there's a great view. So that's why I asked whether we had a picture of that facade, because that facade is essentially a conservatory. May I just Blue Peter style? It's essentially a conservatory. You know, it's like, what's that, 10% solid? So it's not the same as an ordinary house at all. That whole house has been built to take advantage of a view, hasn't it? It's taking advantage of a view. And looking at the neighbours' gardens, rather sadly for them, all the greenery isn't in their garden. So it's not in their control. So currently, if you look at it, they're not actual trees, but they are tall shrubs or treelets, if you like. There is significant greenery where there's no greenery on this plan between the larger trees. There's significant greenery. And on this plan, all of that greenery has gone. I've got pictures of it. Now, if you imagine that it's all gone, that's there to facilitate overbearing conservatory house getting a great view. Now, you're hoping that the people who are standing at the balcony are looking into the distance into Nelson arrayed beneath, but obviously they're people, so they won't be able to help also having a really good peek at the neighbour's laundry if it's out drying. You know, it really is very, very overbearing. I always have had a problem with two things. Mr. Watson is sick of me going on about it. There's no point railing about the law is the law. I'm against retrospective planning applications and I'm against permissions in principle, but nonetheless they do exist. Permissions in principle exist. So we have to look at this. So I read the decision by the inspector and he said, yes, this plot could take a minimum of 1 extra house or a maximum of 2 extra houses and still maintain some pretense of generosity of plot. I don't agree with him, but he is a planning inspector and I'm just a random woman. So we have to accept that he's right in his, it's a big enough plot. But did he envisage a bling-tastic house like this? I mean, it really is sort of California surfing USA, isn't it? Look at it. I mean, you just need to get your surfboard and wonder why there isn't a view of the sea. I don't think that he did envisage such a massive house or such a dominantly tall house. If I was looking at this, you know, with my, I admit, slightly obsessive heritage interests, I would disagree, but we're not falling out about it, with my colleague Ash, and say what's wrong with doing a little bit of arts and crafts detailing? What's wrong with having these houses, these 2 houses in the pit, being read as lodge houses, perhaps single-storey lodge houses with, and this will amuse Mr. Aslam, little dormers poking out of the roof. He'd love me to promote the dormer poking out there. I would love to see a single-storey house with little arts and crafts neo-Tudor dormers. So you have to ask, why is it that such a design wasn't made that would be sympathetic with the conservation area? And you have to come to the conclusion that people would rather have a massive bling-tastic house with a great view. But that view is actually in public views, which you can see below, at the expense of other people. You know, I didn't get the name, sorry, Ashley? Yes. Ashley? So he said, you know, why don't I put some houses in my mother's garden, further down the road? There's a level, isn't there, with how much can this conservation area take? It's like putting sugar into a liquid and stirring. There's a point when it won't take anymore. And perhaps we're not at that point. I don't know what that point is, but if you read the character appraisal, you'll see that it's all about these generous plots, the verdant trees, the setbacks, the glimpses, the neo-Tudor detailing, the arts and crafts. And by putting this in the conservation area, visible from the front, not very visible from the front, very visible from the back, you are spoiling the conservation area, aren't you? I think. You're spoiling it, and the person that's benefiting is the person that's having the great views, and the person that sold them the house with the great views. But the other people, they're at a disadvantage. So I do think that it's not just the immediate neighbours that are suffering here, but I do feel that any inspector who went round, I don't know the area well, I went for the first time really and looked at it on Sunday. I feel any inspector that really went round this area, read the appraisal, wouldn't say, I'll tell you what this needs, this conservation area needs this. They wouldn't say that. And I don't really feel that anybody could call that good design. I mean, what is that? It's just a blank wall. That isn't good design. It's terrible design. So I would second that we turn it down on design, but I would like to explore with Mr. Watson because we don't actually have the facts and the figures on what is the level distance, we ought to consider whether it is in fact overbearing. I certainly stood in that garden and I felt it would be 7.6 metres with a load of glass. Only 5 metres from the 8 metres, 7 metres and 8 metres from the boundary, with no vegetation in the main facade. I felt it would be very overbearing. But we don't have the actual figures that we can talk about there. I just felt it.
Through you, Chairman. Impacts on conservation area. I'm glad we didn't go down that route because we were getting to the point where we were going to talk about in principle again, and that boats the principle argument as sell. Where do you see it from? Sorry, just bear with me. Okay. Where do you see this from? You see it from. It's not for private use. We've already established that. You see it from there. So, in front of this house, you have the existing property. So you see it in the context of that.
Yeah. I
looked at the designs of the other houses. Virtually every single one of them is different. This point you Councillor Sutcliffe made. So you're not looking at a royal crescent here where it's got to be uniform and that's what makes it. The issue for the conservation is not design either. It's not a conservation area that's been put in place for the individual qualities of the buildings. It's there for the plots and the evolution from the farmstead. So it's not purely. Some of the it doesn't come out as well here. Some of the designs here are, and I'm not being pejorative on purpose, but they're decidedly mediocre. Some good, some decidedly mediocre. So, from here, we've already established that the land does drop, but it drops down. So you're probably looking at, and I know there are, you're looking at about a 15 metre drop from there. So you're looking up. So what are you going to see from the public vantage points? You're going to see the foreground of the bungalow. The lady and gentleman says bungalow. A fence. You won't see the ground windows because what you're looking at, the vista won't allow it. So you're looking at the first floor. Again, they've got a balcony. In planning terms, so what? What is the plan? What is the harm in it? They have views. Again, so what? Having a balcony isn't relevant. It's whether the design is correct. Now, it's entirely up to you what you come up with. You may say it's got too much glazing, but a lot of that glazing you won't see just because, unless you study in the neighbour's garden, and that's not a justification. That's not. You're not protecting their outlook. You're protecting the conservation area. So, from north, you're not going to be able to see it. From west, okay, there's an issue about whether it's overbearing for the neighbour, and that's something you'll grapple with. From the east, you've got another plot and trees in between. You're not seeing it from there. From the lower ground, we will have to defend this. We will be asked, what are we going to see from there? What is a member of the public going to see?
I think we're not helped by the fact there aren't any visualisations or topography from there. Do we have visibility displays? LCC asked about that.
Oh yeah, we've got vis displays out to the front. Yeah, even as they stand now, it's high. So, but that's what you grapple with. So that's what we will have to put in evidence. What impact does it have? So you've already got a planning inspector who's saying generally okay.
But he didn't know what the design was going to be, though.
So you're looking at that, and is that from that distance and that vantage point, and those vantage points, which is the closest? Because if you look at it from across the valley, which you can do, you just see a massive. So, for my mind, that's where you grapple with. It's going to be difficult to show the glazing at the bottom because you've got a 1.8 metre high fence, such as the size of windows. So where are you seeing it from? And therefore, if you're not seeing it, what impact can it have on the conservation area?
So you just put your hand over the bottom bit of that picture.
Yeah. Well, if that's what you believe is poor design, then that's what you make your decision on. Plus, whether you believe, I mean, a blank gable to a property it's common to stop overlooking. So you can't put windows in and then say it's better design or it overlooks. You're caught
So
on.
it's got no interest whatsoever.
But what's a public impact?
I think it's poor design. That's my view.
Well, that's the point that I made in my comments.
Yeah.
That I thought that the design could be better, but in principle, it is what it is. There is a line in the report somewhere that talks about the design being based on the coach house, and it has those, and therefore it's regressive in scale. I completely disagree with that. Actually, I think it does it no favours in trying to be like the coach house in its shape. I think that actually makes it more obvious and more prominent rather than regressive. So I think that there are, if you're going to talk about the design of the building, I think there are improvements that could be made to it. But as Mr. Watson's just said, that blank gable is a favour in some respects of not being overlooked. So you're kind of toying with a design as to what you prefer in some ways. Some people may prefer to see a window on there, but then you are overlooked.
Councillor Whip, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I went to hear what Mr. Hurley wanted to come in with, but obviously the rules don't allow him. And what he wants to point out is that the SBD says that the privacy in the back garden is an issue, and the distance which Mr. Watson referred to of 7 metres or so from those balcony windows would not allow the privacy in the back garden. So I would return to my point about the impact on the residential amenity. Whilst I'm speaking, Chairman, I accept, and I think I've referred to this before, that we can't put a case together based on the impact on the conservation area. Mr. Watson's just gone through it, and we'll send him naked into the inspectorate if that's the reason for turning this down. But I'd press on this point about residential amenity, because I think that might be something that actually we could justify. So the specific point is about the privacy in the back garden. Mr. Watson, comment?
Chair, I feel I'm probably over-egging my role there. I think you know, I don't think I can really add anything realistically to what I've said, so it's for you really to make your decision based on the advice I've proffered.
No, but Chairman, specifically the SPD does refer to the privacy in the back garden, and that isn't 21 metres away or 24 metres away.
Chair, I've been here 20 years. Our appeals in Bourne-Alswick, I think on Ben Lane, where the inspector, this relationship is you have a balcony, but you see out the windows. Don't get away from the balcony. You've seen out windows anyway. We've had decisions at Ben Lane, for example, that I know Councillor Whip will be aware of, where that relationship's been found to be perfectly okay. So I'm not going to say a great deal more. My view is that the SPD doesn't preclude. You've got to have some level of overlook, otherwise you'd never build anyway.
Any other speaker? No. Shall we move on to the vote now? Shall we actually first do them, which was moved by Councillor Stone and seconded by Councillor Coburn Price, all those for the refusal based on design?
Design and overbearing, I said.
Chairman, can we be clear? Because
Councillor Stone did say on design.
Stone
he goes design and conservation area.
No,
Yeah.
we don't want that, do
No,
Would you like to add that in?
It's design.
So just design.
I'm happy to accept overbearing.
So design and overbearing. Is
Yes.
that what you mean? That's fine. All go on, sorry.
Does that include lots of privacy to, because overbearing is privacy to the gentleman's house there, or not? I just need to be clear so that I know what case.
Yeah, I think the height is considerable, and that's what I was meaning partly. So it's only loss of privacy to Mr. Hurley, It's not loss of privacy to Dr. Salmon, but it's still overbearing to Dr. Salmon because he's got the height.
So Chairman, and again, we need to be clear, the applicant needs to be clear, and so we've got a design issue, overbearing on the adjacent sandstone property, and poor design includes loss of privacy to the neighbour at the rear.
Okay.
No, I'm asking, not telling.
No. We thankful. We're thankful.
Yeah.
So is that the three that you moved me
Absolutely.
on? That's fine. All those for refusal then. Right. And all those against refusal?
Yeah, fine, thank you.
That's perfect, that's it. Thank you very much.
Yeah.